Hello everyone, I'm Bettina from So Proud. I'm here to share with you an incredible interview with Gill, Rapley and Tracey Murkett. They are the authors of the book, Baby-led Weaning, Helping Your Baby to Love Good Food. The book is a worldwide reference to all who talk about the baby-led weaning approach. Gill researched, documented, and gave a name to it. Gil and Tracey, thank you so much for being here today. Would you like to present yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Tracey Murkett.
I'm Gill Rapley. Hi. We're really delighted to be here and thank you so much for asking us.
I'm very glad that everybody is so excited about baby-led weaning.
We are now nearly 10 years after the launch of your first baby-led weaning book. Your book is the main ally of families for introducing solid foods in a more natural way, respecting the baby's development. Congratulations for this achievement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. What is the baby-led weaning definition that you want people to memorize and share? And what is the best word to describe it?
Well, baby-led weaning is a natural, common sense approach. It allows babies to make the transition to solid food at their own pace by joining in with the family and feeding themselves. So it respects babies' instincts, their appetite and their abilities.
We find it difficult to choose one word to describe it, but we think there are 5 key things really. That it's healthy, it's about sharing, it's relaxed and enjoyable, it needs to be safe, and it always needs to be led by the baby. But we can't find just one word.
What are then the main benefits for the families doing baby-led weaning and for the baby?
Well, it's for the families, it's easy, it's enjoyable, it means there are no mealtime battles, it's not stressful, the babies are less likely to be picky eaters, so mealtimes will always be enjoyable. Sharing a meal with your baby is so much easier than preparing separate food. And it encourages social skills and interaction within the family.
So, and for parents as well, it's because it's based on natural infant development, there's no need for stages or schedules, and the baby can manage the gradual changeover from milk. There's no need for parents to worry about how much milk the baby's taking or how much food the baby's taking, because the baby can do that themselves. So it's more relaxed for the parents. They don't have to worry. The baby can lead the way.
And we think for babies it helps them develop a better relationship with food, that learn to trust their natural appetite. Nobody is trying to override that, so that will help them to eat the right amount throughout their life, we think. It also allows them to take all the milk they need. We know now much more about breastfeeding and how valuable it is. So babies can be taking as much breast milk as they need for as long as they need. If they're formula fed, again, formula milk has improved so much over the years that again babies can have more formula milk for longer this way. And the research suggests that there's less risk that they'll become obese or not choose healthy foods when they're toddlers.
And it's also, for babies, it's a very positive natural learning experience. They can touch, they can look, they can smell the food, they can taste it, and they can experiment with it, which is a very natural way of learning. They're learning through experience. And food provides lots and lots of different experiences. It's like all the educational toys you can imagine put together, because there are so many different textures and so many different sensory experiences for the baby. So that's huge. As well as that being in control of their learning and their eating makes them confident. It makes them very trusting of food, and it makes them feel that they're allowed, that their parents are trusting their abilities and trusting that they're able to do things, and that's very good for babies. Mm-hmm. There's also chewing at the optimal time means there's good development of jaw and facial bones, natural development of jaw and facial bones, mm-hmm. which leads to better teeth spacing and probably better speech as well, because they're chewing when they're naturally ready to chew, rather than having purees for a long time, like lots and lots of babies do. So they're able to exercise all these muscles.
When is then the best time for parents to start learning about complementary feeding through baby-led weaning approach?
As early as possible, really. We think a lot of parents will start looking into it during the pregnancy. That's when they're thinking ahead to how they're going to feed their baby from the beginning. And it's natural to look beyond that. And that gives them plenty of time to think about their own diet and making sure that it's really healthy. They might want to start looking at maybe how much salt they use and how much junk food they eat or ready meals, and making some changes. If they want to perhaps attend some cookery classes, if they don't feel confident about cooking at home, thinking about it during the pregnancy will give them lots of time to plan ahead.
What we find is lots and lots of families who maybe weren't eating very healthily before they had their baby or before they started baby-led weaning, then start to eat very much more healthily, because they're going to share the baby they're going to share the food with the baby. So they start cooking from scratch, and they just start thinking a bit more about healthy food. And it's never too early to start doing that. But equally, if you start a week before you want to start offering your baby food, that's fine as well. It's just thinking about food being healthy and being suitable to be shared with your baby.
I always come across to the question, which first food to offer? From your experience, do you know if it exists any relationship with what the mother was craving during the pregnancy?
Well, that's a really interesting one. As far as is known, as far as we know, what mothers crave in pregnancy is to do with the nutrition that mother needs, the nutrients that she needs to find. So she seeks out food with those nutrients in it. But we also know that the amniotic fluid in the womb that the baby is swimming in, it carries the flavours of what she eats, as does her breast milk afterwards. So whether or not it's the food that she craves, certainly the foods that she eats during pregnancy and while she's breastfeeding are going to be the foods that the baby's going to enjoy most at the beginning. We know from quite a lot of research that babies are much more keen to eat food that they've already tasted through the amniotic fluid or through breast milk.
Which is why, again, that it's a good idea for babies to do baby-led weaning, because they're then eating the food they expect to eat, because it's the same flavours that they're used to, that the mother has been eating. So they're used to those flavours.
Also, the question about the very first food is an interesting one, because it's one of the things that's difficult to define with baby-led weaning. And because we're going with 6 months as the beginning of solid foods, we no longer have to follow those sort of strict rules about starting with one food and then waiting a few days before introducing the next one. Actually, babies can be offered a range of foods right from the beginning. So the first food the baby actually eats might not be the one the parents expect. It's really up to the baby. As long as there's healthy food available to him, it's nice for him to have the opportunity to start to choose from the very beginning.
Yeah, so he'll just have whatever food you happen to be eating when he's ready to taste it. So it's not quite as predictable as you might think, because he's not necessarily going to eat the first food that you offer him.
That's an interesting point of view. I often observe that solid food introduction is more a mom's task. How do you think the families can include more the father in the baby-led weaning journey of their children?
Well, that's interesting as well, because it's almost baby-led weaning is automatically more inclusive because it's about shared meal times. So if the mother is more involved, perhaps at mornings and lunch times, that's more a question of maternity leave and paternity leave, because it's all the family eat together, So it's more a question of who's doing the most childcare. But there's no reason why the father should feel excluded, because it's a more equal role, because nobody's really feeding the baby. You're just sharing your meals. So it's everybody together.
Something that a lot of parents say is that with baby-led weaning, they don't have to decide that one of them will have their food get cold while they're feeding the baby and the other one will have hot food. Everyone can have their food at the temperature they want because the baby's feeding himself. So there's no longer a role of who's going to feed the baby. It's automatically shared.
Thank you. Many families face difficulties in continuing this approach when the baby enters in the kindergarten. In your opinion, can this approach also be applied in the kindergarten? Or what suggestions can you give for this to happen?
Well, there are lots of nurseries and kindergartens in the UK that have started to do baby-led weaning. They were quite resistant to start with, but once they knew about it and saw it in action, the key thing for anybody looking after your baby is seeing baby-led weaning in action, because then they know they can trust the baby to self-feed, that babies are quite skilled and they know when to stop and they know what they want. So
and there are huge advantages for the staff as well, because it's so much quicker to sit with 5 babies who are feeding themselves, for example, than to have to feed each baby individually. So once they give it a go, they usually are won over straight away. And more nurseries are being encouraged, shall we say, to follow baby-led weaning because the parents are talking to them about it and are doing it at home. So it's happening, and I think it will happen in other countries too.
Well, I hope so too. It will make a lot of families happier. It's already a difficult transition to leave your baby in kindergarten. If the food aspect is also tackled, I think the families will be much happier.
Yeah. The big thing to explain to nursery staff is to allow the baby to eat as little as they want. I think that's the one of the problems that parents come across, because the nursery staff feel like they're not quite doing their job if the baby doesn't eat a certain amount. So it's really about getting that information really clear, that you don't mind if your baby only eats a certain amount.
Yeah, so it's about understanding what baby-led weaning is, what it means and why it works, and then having a dialogue between parents and nursery staff or kindergarten staff, and then it will happen.
So why do you think it's so difficult to change our heads in relation to baby-led weaning? Is it because people are used to raise their children based on what their parents did, or because there's pressures from society, or something else?
Well, it's a bit of both, I think. There's sometimes pressure from parents or grandparents to do things the way that they did it. There's still a bit of pressure to have fat babies, which we now know isn't good for babies, but there's a pressure to kind of make sure babies are fat. And some of the pressure is from outside, from the baby food industry. I don't know about Switzerland, but in the UK, they have from 4 months still on some of the jars. So it gives the impression that babies should be having that at 4 months, which is the opposite of baby-led weaning, really. And babies have been conditioned over many, many years to think, parents have been conditioned over many years to believe that babies need help with feeding, because for so many years they were fed before they were really old enough to be having solid foods.
I think linked to that is the extra research that there is nowadays into breast milk and its value for babies. So we're understanding that there's no rush to introduce solid foods or to get them to take over from breast milk early. We can allow a little bit more time. But that takes perhaps even a few generations for that message to really get across. And it's hard for the grandmothers when they see their daughters and their daughters-in-law doing something different and doing something which they were told was wrong. And for everybody to understand that all of us just do the best we can with the information we have at the time, and that we need to let today's parents do the same with the information that's available to them.
I think some of the information as well that isn't really getting through is that babies really don't need very much to eat on top of breast milk or formula, that they need very, very small amounts to start with. So people think they've been conditioned by the size of baby food jars, so they think they need a lot more food than they actually do. And that's quite hard to change. That's going to take a little while for people to really trust that their baby doesn't need to eat very much as long as they're having as much milk, as many milk feeds as they need.
Based on that, does baby-led weaning works for all babies and all families?
Well, it works for all babies in the sense that all babies can be encouraged and supported to do whatever they can for themselves and to use the skills that they're developing as those skills emerge. But obviously there are some babies who are developing differently and whose skills will not be at the level they need to be at the point where they need extra food. So it would be perfectly normal to want to help those babies in whatever way is necessary. In just the same way as you have babies who are not able to sit up or walk or talk or maybe don't hear properly, all the other problems that babies can have, we do things to help them. We don't just leave them to get on with it. So it's to be expected that some babies may need some help with feeding, either because they physically can't do it or because they need food before they're old enough or developed enough to manage it. But the key point is that we would like to think all babies are helped to do what they can and to be as autonomous as possible. We've heard a lot of stories, for example, of babies with, let's say, Down syndrome, who manage very, very well with baby-led weaning. They need a little bit of help, but they also are babies who are, in the past, have tended to be quite passive and just sit back and be fed. And this actually encourages them to do more than they might do otherwise. So it's not right to say there are babies who can't do baby-led weaning. Having said all of that, there are parents who find baby-led weaning a little bit difficult, and generally it's because they are finding it hard to allow their baby to have that sort of control. And so it may not be for all families, or it may be the parents need to do some thinking about why they're finding it difficult. But it's usually not their baby who's really having the difficulty. Did you want to say something about how society can sort of help support all babies to do baby-led weaning, if you know what I mean?
It's really about kind of recognising that babies are capable people, and they have abilities and they can use those abilities. So it's about society as a whole trusting babies' abilities.
And being tolerant when
yes,
it's a bit messy in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Being tolerant when it's messy and recognising that these are valuable learning experiences they're having. It's not about getting a certain amount of food into a baby. It's about allowing a baby to become familiar with food gradually and to eat as much as they need. So it's a whole society shift about allowing that and trusting babies rather than thinking they have to eat this amount by that age.
As you know, I'm very enthusiastic of this approach. Often I observe many people giving up. From your experience, what are the main reasons for parents to give up? What suggestions can you give them to continue with this approach?
There are a lot of reasons why parents might decide to not pursue baby-led weaning, and mostly they're the sort of things we've talked about, that they find it difficult to hand over the control to the child, or that they are feeling under pressure from families or friends. Some find it really hard to accept that he does know when he's had enough, even though the plate isn't empty. A lot find it difficult in the very early weeks because it can be a long time before the baby really begins to eat anything very much. He's spending time exploring and getting to know food, and they are worried during that time that he may not be eating what he should. what else can we think of? I suppose the fear of choking is a big one.
Yeah, some people are afraid that their baby will choke, but in fact the risks of choking are very low, and they're no higher with baby-led weaning than they are with purees. Choking and gagging choking is very rare, gagging is very common, and gagging happens with both purees and baby-led weaning. They're just at different times and different circumstances. So the things that can really help babies, parents to keep going, are things like just watching the baby and really observing how much he's getting out of handling food, how clever he is, how much progress he's making, even if the progress isn't how much food he's taking in. The progress might be how he's able to pick things up, how he's able to get things to his mouth more accurately. That's the kind of things that are really exciting for babies and really exciting for parents if they kind of recognise how important they are.
Yes, we're used to measuring progress with eating in how much is eaten, not in the skills that the baby's developing. So we need to have a bit of a shift in the way we appreciate what babies are doing. We also think it's really good if parents read about baby-led weaning so they fully understand it, and get in touch with other parents who are doing it, whether that's physically, near them, family and friends, or online via some of the forums. Most people have the same sorts of doubts and uncertainties at the beginning, so sharing those with other people and learning from people who've got through that and come out the other side is really valuable. And I suppose another useful thing is simply to learn what to do if there was an emergency, so that you feel confident that if anything did go wrong, you would be able to handle it. Although the risk's no greater, it's something that all parents should know if they're offering food to babies.
Choking is more common with toddlers and toys, so it's very important for all parents.
Yes, it's not just about food.
It's not just about food. It's often small toys, and it's important that parents know how to deal with that.
But if they've been to a course and studied it, then they'll have confidence and they can set that worry aside and just relax and enjoy their meal times with their baby.
Will all babies that had solid food introduction based on baby-led weaning approach will have a healthy relationship with food? Will they be perfect eaters? What is then the main guarantee of this approach?
There isn't really a guarantee because it depends on so many things. In general, what we've seen is that babies who do baby-led weaning have a good relationship with food, and they like a wide range of different foods, and they like healthier food as well. And that's likely to be because the meal times are less stressful, they're more enjoyable, they're not pressured to eat a certain amount of things, and certainly picky eating is much less common, and mealtime battles just don't exist because there's nothing to argue over. But one of the key things we've found to having a child who eats well long term is, as they grow, to carry on being baby-led, child-led. It's very common once your baby gets bigger and they can speak and they're no longer having milk feeds, maybe. It's very common then for the parents to try and persuade them to eat more than they want or to eat particular things. So it's really important to keep the respect and to keep trusting your child, even when they're bigger. It's very common for people to think that babies in their second year should be eating more. Actually, they tend to eat less because their calorie needs are actually less in their second year because the growth is less. So if you want your child to stay being with their natural appetite control and enjoying a wide range of food and all the good things that baby-led weaning brings, then you have to kind of try and stay as child-led as possible and remember not to put pressure on them. And also, as they get older, not to make some foods a reward. It's very common to want to reward toddlers for eating everything, so you can have your ice cream if you finish this. Once you can talk to children, negotiate with them, that can introduce a whole load of problems that aren't anything to do with baby-led weaning. And sometimes it's just a case of people changing their approach that can change the way the baby reacts to food. But in general, most parents say, yeah, the baby has a lovely relationship with food.
Do you have contact with families that have older children wean through baby-led weaning? Nowadays, how do these families describe their children's relationship with food?
We have contact with some families, certainly, and Tracey's also used baby-led weaning. So those reports we hear generally tell us that these children eat healthily, enjoy their meals. Some of them do say that their child still went through a slightly picky stage as a toddler, but it was very rarely something long-lived. The other sort of slight bump in the road, if you like, is when they start nursery or school and they're perhaps influenced by other children who start telling them that, you know, sweet things or chocolate is really the best thing in the world. But in general, again, they may go through a short period of going along with that, but it seems that the tastes they've developed in babyhood will stay with them long term, and so they go back to eating the healthy food. The research isn't yet available to tell us long term what these children's relationship with food is, because baby-led weaning hasn't been going long enough for us to have enough children who've been through it. But the signs are really good that these are children who understand their bodies and their appetite, and who have not learnt to use food to comfort themselves or reward themselves, and they eat in a mindful way, if you like. They have a relationship with food which is about eating and not cluttered up with other emotions.
Mm-hmm. After your first publication, you continue researching more about baby-led weaning. Can you already share some new insights from your studies?
Well, I suppose this is mainly me, yes. Well, the research I did for my PhD was just not really about the whole of baby-led weaning, but just comparing self-feeding with spoon-feeding from the baby's point of view. I wanted to know how it was for the baby, those two different methods of feeding, especially when they first encountered solid food, their very first meeting with solid food. And I just was amazed by how much time the baby spent exploring the food and using all their senses, seeing what it looked like, touching it, poking it, squashing it, and it's not about playing with food exactly, it's about exploring and learning. But when they were spoon-fed, most of the time they spent avoiding what was going on and becoming upset and trying to escape from what was happening. So the messages I took from that were that we really do need to look at how foods are offered. We can't just assume that babies do or don't like certain flavours, which is what a lot of the research tells us, when we haven't taken into account how that food was offered. Babies may well be very accepting of foods that they can pick up for themselves, but not like the same food offered off a spoon. And we need to remember that to a 6-month-old baby, all foods are new, and they all need to be explored and understood. For most adults, when they are faced with a new food, the first thing they do is look at it and sniff it and maybe poke it. And they do a lot of things before they actually put it in their mouth, because they want some information about it and they want to know what to expect when it's in their mouth. And we need to understand that babies need to do that with each new food, and several times with each new food, before they're going to get to the point where they just start eating without thinking. Another thing I learned from the research I did was that purees actually alter the taste of food, as well as changing its texture and what it looks like. They actually change the taste. So when we're giving babies pureed food, we may not really be helping them to learn to like that food the way they will encounter it later. So we need to ask ourselves why we're doing that if the baby doesn't need the food pureed. And I also discovered that purees are not necessarily easy to eat. If a baby can already chew, when you try and chew a puree, it doesn't work. It just sort of splurges all over your mouth. You can't easily gather it together to manage it and swallow it. So they may be fine for babies who can't yet chew, but for babies who can chew, they're not necessarily easy to eat. So we need to get past that thinking and realize that we should be working with the ability that that baby has at that point. And I really do think that a dislike of the way food is offered, either its consistency or whether it's spoon-fed, that can be at the root of a lot of the problems we see with food refusal. I think that the roots of those difficulties are very, very early on. Yeah.
So baby-led weaning babies are kind of special babies. What can they actually teach their parents?
Well, I don't think they're special. They're biologically normal. I think they're eating the way that they should be eating. It's natural. That's how you naturally learn about food. But they can tell us a lot just by watching them. We can learn how clever they are, how quickly they can develop new skills, as long as they're allowed to practice. They also teach us patience, because you have to just be patient and let the baby do it in his own time. You have to be patient and not jump in to help when the baby's working out how to hold something or trying to get it to his mouth, not quite managing.
I think it's really interesting because from the parent's perspective, often the goal is to get the food eaten. We forget that isn't the baby's goal. His goal is to learn about it, and he will discover by accident that it also is nice to taste and will help to fill his tummy. But he's coming at it from a different place. And if we recognise that our goals are different, that will reduce a lot of the opportunity for battles, I think, and for fighting.
Yeah.
So babies are more interested in the process of eating, and the parents on the final result, how much did the baby actually eat.
Exactly. And if you learn to see things from your baby's point of view, then you kind of understand that actually it's about the experience. It's not about getting a certain amount of food in.
I think parents also learn how to trust their baby in terms of his appetite. If they watch over a period of time and not just focus on each meal as it happens, they will see that their baby's appetite varies from meal to meal, from day to day, depending on whether he's well or not well. So many different variables, but that overall babies eat what they need to eat, and we can trust them to do that.
And I think that is a really good lesson for adults who, on the whole, probably would have been told to clean their plate, to eat what's on in front of them. And if you watch your baby, then you can learn to eat more mindfully too, and to recognise that you're going to have hungry days, less hungry days, and to want different things at each meal. And you may not eat the same amount every day, 3 times a day. Your body doesn't work like that. And if you watch what your baby does, they can help you to eat more mindfully too.
So actually parents can take advantage of this approach to revise their own relationship with food and change their food habits.
Yes, and that's what many parents tell us, that this is a trigger for them to really start looking at what they're eating and change their habits, especially when this is the first baby. And perhaps as a couple just living the two of them, both of them working, they've eaten a lot of ready meals or takeaway foods, and they really need to look at the content of what they're eating and how they could eat better. And so many of them tell us that having this opportunity to look at their own diet is something that maybe they wouldn't have done if they were starting with, especially if they were going to buy commercial foods for their babies. It wouldn't have had the same impact on them and their own diet.
So, for example, a lot of them will learn how to cook at home, and they'll start to cut down on the salt. And that sometimes, it's easier in a way for that to happen earlier, because your baby's going to be included in your meals at some point. And quite often people think with an older baby it doesn't matter quite so much if you're having a bit of junk food every now and then, whereas with a younger baby people tend to make bigger changes. And a lot of people see that as a huge advantage of baby-led weaning, that it's really helped them to eat. more healthily as a family.
I'm now learning a bit more about the Montessori philosophy. And when reading Montessori's books, a lot of things were familiar to me. Observing child's behavior, facilitating their natural development, respecting the child, prepare the environment. Maria Montessori based the studies on observations of children performing activities. Jill, you observe children during meal times. So I dare to say that you are the Dr. Montessori of weaning. The main differences I've seen between the two approaches are that in Montessori, weaning the baby eats alone in a so-called weaning table versus babies included at the table during the family meal times in baby-led weaning approach. Food is presented to the baby on plates versus food is presented directly on the tray or table. Utensils are available to the baby since the beginning of weaning in Montessori approach versus utensils are introduced later in the baby-led weaning approach. Despite the differences, do you think that the Montessori weaning and baby-led weaning approaches can work together?
Yes. I mean, as you say, there are some basic similarities and there are some differences. And I know a lot of parents are attracted by both the philosophies. I think the really important thing to remember is that the Montessori approach was developed during the lifetime of Maria Montessori, and since her death has sort of stayed almost frozen in time. And a lot of parents have said to me that if Maria Montessori were alive today, she probably would be very much in favour of baby-led weaning. For example, in her day, solid foods were introduced at around 4 months. Well, we know that at 4 months, babies can't feed themselves. They can't even sit upright. So you can't do baby-led weaning starting at 4 months and expect the baby to feed himself. And in those days, therefore, babies always started on pureed food and they tended to be fed on an adult's lap until they were able to sit up by themselves. And I think another big difference is that Maria Montessori wrote mostly about how children should be cared for in nurseries and daycare situations. And her focus, as I understand it, was really from age 2 upwards. She didn't write quite so much about the very young children. And I think there was just an assumption that they would be spoon-fed until they were able to hold the spoon for themselves. So the idea of feeding with your hands just didn't really enter into it. As I say, I think now she maybe would have had a different approach. Also because most of her guidelines were around the daycare or institutional setting, eating with the family was not really the focus. The children were eating with other children. They weren't eating on their own. We're not talking about a baby eating at a weaning table on his own, or at least not the way I understand it. So they were still eating in a social setting. And at home, that I hope would be translated by eating with the family. Yes, there was a lot of focus on plates and cutlery and so on. But again, for an older baby, that's absolutely appropriate. And there's nothing in baby-led weaning that says you shouldn't offer your baby the chance to use cutlery as soon as they seem interested. The point where that happens is perhaps a bit earlier with baby-led weaning than it would have been would be with the traditional Montessori approach, because the babies are not already being fed by spoon. So it's just coming from a different starting point. You end up with something slightly different. But I think, as I say, her thinking should be allowed to evolve, and many of her followers, I think, would like to embrace baby-led weaning as part of that, in the belief that she would have been in favour of that.
Yeah. We are now finalizing this interview. Gil and Tracey, I would like you to send a message to my audience of parents and other educators. What would you like to say to them?
Enjoy baby-led weaning and trust your baby.
Yes,
they can do it.
Go for it. It's great fun. It's very rewarding, and your baby will thank you for it and enjoy it with you.
Gil and Tracey, thank you very much. I'm honored to have you on my blog today, speaking about such an interesting topic. I hope to speak again with you soon. Who knows, you might come to Switzerland to give a talk. I will be there for sure.
That'd be lovely. We'd love to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And
Thank
I
you.
wish you all the best and all the success.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.